guys all for coming. I put this presentation together in an effort to put my thoughts together, which was quite frankly fun for me. I'm going to attempt to bring several ideas together into one stream of thought, and you guys will tell me whether I managed to do this or not. So my idea is homeschool in homeschool is that the medium is the message. Now, who's heard that phrase before?
I have.
Okay, for Canadians, how many are Canadians? I want to get a show of hands here, because I realized as I put this together, inadvertently, this is a very Canadian presentation, and really I didn't mean to do that, but it's just an interesting outgrowth. Now, why homeschool is the best fit for the coming future, and this is what, for me, is so interesting about homeschool. And so, the first thing, I want to tell you what my central thoughts are that I'm going to try and string together. And they are eclectic. So first, the direction that the global economy is going in. What are we preparing our kids for? Okay, because if we don't know what we're preparing them for, it's very hard to have a name as to what we're doing. The next thought is understanding how and why institutional education was created, and the structures of these institutions and how they actually structure our kids. And for those of you that know the meaning of the medium is the message, that's where this comes in, and I will make that very clear, I hope. The evolutionary biology and attachment patterns. Now, we talked a little bit yesterday about attachment parenting, so this will come to here. And how they affect the emotional well-beingness of our children and their effectiveness in future life. I think we know that if somebody emotionally isn't well-centered, it is going to be very difficult for them to undertake whatever it is that their life brings upon them. And so this is an underpinning of homeschooling for me that I want to bring forward. And then very strangely, global warming. So this is going to be my attempt to link all these four thoughts together. Now, any questions about that before I go on? Does that make sense? Is that confusing already? Okay, so first, what happens with our world economy right now? We're in a situation where the future really is very uncertain. We already hear as parents, I know that we've had individual conversations with several folks here about how economically life has kind of pushed them in directions that were unexpected. And a lot of it has to do with what's going on in the labor force and in the economy. And so, with increasing reliance on automation, we're finding that there's less and less jobs. Okay, this means that people have to start getting more and more creative. According to an article that was put out in Fortune magazine, we've got 45% of jobs that people are doing today will be automated very, very soon. Jeremy Rifkin, economist and social theorist, wrote this book. It's called The End of Work. And in this book, basically, he argues that there's two opposing forces that are making the future of jobs increasingly unreliable and unstable. And I think we all have a sense of this, but here a little bit more concretely, he says, an information elite that manages and controls the global high-tech economy, and the other is a growing number of displaced workers. And so what we have really is a very unstable floor in order to build our economic existence. Now, what does that mean for our kids? Because this is what we're starting to see this, but obviously as our kids grow and as time passes, this is only going to become more and more unstable. And so what we have is now that job hopping is the new normal. The average worker in the States has 4.4 years in any particular job. Now, the younger set, this is actually about half the time. That means about 2 years in any given job. Now that means that in their lifetime, our children are likely to hold 15 to 20 jobs. And that could potentially, from what studies are showing, mean as many as 4 or 5 completely dissimilar occupation areas. So one day I'm a farmer, the next day I'm an industry worker, the next day I'm in tourism. So these are completely dissimilar. It's not like I'm following in a line and I'm growing according to that line. It's not like I went into tech and I'm going to go from one tech company to another tech company. It means one day I'm a farmer and the next day I'm in a tech company. So we really need people with the possibility of surfing, okay? And I'm going to use that phrase throughout, surfing this new reality. Now add to this global warming. And this is something that's interesting because this is going to radically change things even further. Why? You tell me. I want a little participation from everybody. So what you see in this picture, how is global warming going to change this bear's reality?
Food, water, shelter, family.
Can he continue on tomorrow the way that he did yesterday?
No.
See, this is something that when you realize that we don't really know how far up the ocean is going to move, or maybe it's not going to be that bad, but maybe it will, but maybe it'll just shift a little bit. But maybe the folks that right now are in a farming district won't be able to farm anymore because it'll move further north or further south. Maybe those shifts are going to be huge. Maybe they won't be, but certainly it's going to mean adjusting. Okay? And in the particular context of this conference with Global World School, that tells us a lot about movement. This peninsula, for example, if the ocean does move up just a wee bit, is completely flat. So pretty much everybody here would eventually have to go. So that looks and connects in with the global schooling that we're talking about. Anyways, so now I'm going to link this to the next thought. Now this is Marshall McLuhan, and he's a Canadian philosopher of communications theory and a public figure. And his phrase is, "The medium is the message." Now it's very important, in order to understand what I'm going to talk about, that we get what he talks about. Basically what he says is, a medium affects society in which it plays a role, not by the content delivered over the medium, but by the characteristics of the medium itself. Now he uses a light bulb to explain this. Is there content in a light bulb? What's the content of a light bulb? There's no content. It gives light. How has the light bulb changed our lives? Think of your life before light bulbs, or your ancestors' lives before light bulbs, and your life now with light bulbs. What has changed?
The ability to read at night.
The ability to read at night. Our relationship with day and night. What else?
Humans that things can be 24 hours.
24 hours, so you could potentially have a 24-hour cycle and labor and work. Anything else?
There's an electric bill.
There's an electric bill. Again, we're all focusing on that economy side that we were talking about. So the light bulb, without having any specific content, has changed the way we live our lives. Okay, is that more or less? Yeah? Okay, now I want to take this in a little further so that we can really dig into this concept. The content of any medium binds us to the character of the message itself. So much as the light bulb, and again, I want a little participation from you, so, put your hands up. Here's a book as a medium. Now, with the same logic that I just expressed with the light bulb, how do you interact with a book? What's your thoughts?
You can only interact with the book.
You can, okay, so language is an issue. Very interesting, good. What else?
Touching.
You get to touch it. That's changed, definitely.
Give it to someone.
You can share it. Pass on that knowledge. Great.
Pass on the book too. Pass on the book too.
Pass the book on.
Well, the book kind of gives the impression that there's something important inside of it. So you start to associate books with knowledge.
Right. So there's associations culturally with the book as an item. Great. Now I want you to look at this. I can have a book and I can have a TV program about the same content, but they're going to be very different. Okay, and maybe this will help us illustrate that idea. How does the TV as a medium change the way we deal with that content?
It's passive.
It's passive.
The television is providing somebody else's view of the content of the book.
Okay, very interesting. So you've got a filter or an intermediary, an interpretation.
A different interpretation.
Very good.
I was just going to say that the television limits your imagination, your creativity.
So maybe the book allows us to be more creative in our mind and absorb the information differently. Very interesting.
I think there's the assumption that the TV is lesser than the book, to be honest, because that's what for me, for school, for example, textbooks I know are in general owned by the same people, so I don't trust any of it in a book, and so when they translate it to TV, for me it's the same.
Right.
It just confuses you a little bit.
Right.
So, for me.
Sure. So there's a cultural understanding that's different between the book and the television. Okay.
TV can actually reach a broader audience because you have people who are non-viewers.
Interesting.
So it is actually a broader, it's a different learning style, some visuals.
Beautiful. Now think also about how we read a book and how we watch TV, because I want to focus on the medium itself.
So, as she just stated, with a larger audience, there's a price to pay for watching the television. So in order to watch the television, you have to also watch the advertisement that comes with it, which again goes back to the global economy, whoever has the most money for that particular program. So this weekend is the Super Bowl, whoever's willing to pay $1 million a spot, you're going to get to watch that 30 seconds of what they're going to try to sell you. As with a book, you just get to breeze through it and at your own pace with no interruptions or your own interruptions.
Very interesting. Good. Any other thoughts on the TV? Yeah?
I've read some studies that say now our attention span is far shorter, but after 10 to 20 minutes, we've lost.
That's a very good point, and that speaks very directly to the medium as the message. So the fact of the TV medium changes the way we interact with the information. As you guys have pointed out, often, not always, but often, there's less depth in the TV, and of course there's angles. Of course books also have angles, and authors have their point of view, but it tends to be more overt, perhaps, in TV programming because of economics, if we follow the money, so to speak.
I just wanted to point out too that for myself as a learner, I'm a visual learner. However, I like to refer back to text. So in books, I'm a person who likes to highlight or underline or go back, or put the little stickies on the page. And those are the gems for me.
Sure.
Whereas with visual content, unless I'm scratching stuff down.
Right.
I have a picture. Yeah, I have a very visual picture, but the text is important.
Sure. Very good.
I think we are more passive learners with the television. We tend to look at it more as entertainment. And for children, especially, what they see becomes more of a truth than what they hear.
Yes.
And when it's a book, we're putting more thought into what we're choosing. We're actually picking it up with a purpose in mind. And a lot of times the TV is just running to run.
Very good. Now I'm going to put one more item on here for you.
I knew it.
Now we're in the age of the internet. Okay, the medium is the message. Run the same analysis for me. What do you see in the internet? How has the internet changed the way that we understand?
So what I mentioned with the price of television was advertisement. With the internet, what you also get, what the internet's able to do with some of these companies is now, whatever text you're reading, if you're reading an article or a blog, more than likely in your side scope, you're also going to see an advertisement off with your peripheral vision. And normally that advertisement is going to be based on any type of searches that you've already done on your computer. So if you search, let's say for dog food that day, I wonder if I found some healthy dog food. And then tomorrow when you go and you read somebody's blog, a lot of times, or you do a Google search, that dog food is going to be popping up in your links.
Right, so advertising is more direct.
Yes, maybe you can receive an email now from the company itself.
Right.
The other thing that happens now is that you have multiple interpretations, multiple people saying what they think of the subject. So
Right.
sometimes you can get lost. You cannot trust everyone. You can be more challenging the ideas that are the content that is on the internet.
So potentially the internet is in fact inciting more critical thought. That's interesting. Very good.
Clay sure you guys had a really great talk about this whole thing. When I look at those three things, the first one to me is it's just me, it's one-to-one. The TV is one-to-many. The internet is many-to-many. We're not only consuming, but we're producing content.
Correct.
And that's the big difference now. We're all connected. We're consumers and producers, and we're all connected to each other.
Fantastic. Very nice point.
I have a little difficulty with that because we assume that everyone is connected to the internet, and it's actually not true. Sure, all of us in this room probably have the potential to be connected to the internet, but there are many people, and I think this is where that economic reality kicks in, that we are basing our economic reality on our experience where we've grown up or we have exposure to, but there's lots of thousands of people that will never have access to the internet, will never have that media experience
Fantastic.
because there are such things as
fantastic point. Now, a couple of things on that, and it goes a little to what you're saying. Physically, how do we read a book? I want you to picture yourself reading a book. What's the milieu that you read a book in?
The toilet.
The toilet. The toilet actually is a great example because it is the epitome of your private space. So that's actually brilliant. A book is, generally speaking, an individual situation. You sit, you read, it's an individual experience. How do we watch TV? Hopefully not yet in the toilet, although I'm sure there's some households where that is true.
On the phone.
What?
You can, I'm saying, you have the TV in the toilet.
Nowadays, but that goes back to the internet.
Right.
Let's skip one step back. Let's think of the big TV block. How do we watch TV? In the living room. So in an interesting way, it's actually a family gathering, potentially. So we interact differently with each medium. And today, we actually have people who will change the way they physically move in the city, depending on where they can have access to Wi-Fi. How many people, when you came to the conference, one of your first points of this is an issue for me is where can I get Wi-Fi? And so we literally now move physically in space in different ways than we did before Wi-Fi was an issue. That's a very clear example of the medium is the message. So the medium has now changed the way that we deal with our situation in life, how we interact with our world. Okay, now I want to apply the same analytical framework to school and understand what the medium of school is actually teaching our kids. So, school, it's top down. That gives you an idea. I want a little bit of an interaction. How does school teach our kids as a medium, not as content?
Are you talking about traditional schools?
Traditional schools.
Okay.
Traditional, yeah.
Okay.
Traditional institutional education. Okay. K to 12 is, for me, actually, the main difference between homeschool, unschool, world school is institutional versus non-institutional.
Got it.
So here I'm discussing institutional education, the one that chances are most all of us here present actually grew up in. So tell me, put that same framework of analysis into school and tell me what you think.
Obedience is rewarded.
Obedience is rewarded. Beautiful. What else?
You're controlled, the student is controlled, their content that's given to them, they have no choice over.
Content is controlled, set from above.
Standardization.
Standardization. Everything's standard.
Method of doing things. There's one way to do each thing.
Beautiful. By the way, I want to introduce Myron Frankman, who is partially an inspiration of all of what I do today. He is actually the man who opened up the possibility for me to create my own university career. So, yeah, he's a fantastic inspiration to open learning. Anyway, yes?
One size fits all.
One size fits all?
Physically stationary.
Physically stationary, very interesting. That's particularly interesting for our kinesthetic children. We've got more and more kids that are being told that they need to be on all sorts of drugs because they're not stationary enough. Okay, so very good point.
Age segregation.
Age segregation.
Looks like a prison.
Looks like a prison. Actually, institutionally, there's a lot of similarities. Yeah.
Class segregation.
Class segregation. Very interesting. So you've got your private schools, you've got your public schools, you've got your schools now for the super affluent 1%. Yeah.
Interaction with people of your own age.
So similar age groups, you're separated and segregated.
And I would say, again, to the top-down issue, it's about indoctrination. You are subjected to whoever decides what you need to be subjected to.
Clearly, I'm speaking to the choir. So I'm just going to go through some of these. It's top-down, it's systematic. Rules and orders are prioritized. Goals and standards are set from above. You do not get a choice in what you think is important. It's intended to serve many and thus must be standardizing. And you end up with a situation where in the best of cases they're teaching to the middle, and often it's not even that, they're actually teaching to the lowest common denominator. Prioritizes conformity. You cannot, no matter how wonderful and inspired a teacher you are, have 30 children that are individuals and teach 30 children with one teacher and actually do individualized learning. It's literally impossible. So you have to have conformity. Categorizes and pigeonholes people, and we talked about that already as well. It assumes that it is the holder of the higher truth, what is right.
Yeah.
Okay, this is really important, and we talked about it with the 9 planets on our first talk that we had, and it's something that's apparent in so many ways. I remember when we moved to Canada, it was very interesting for me because a textbook was given to us for social studies. And there was 4 quadrants, and throughout the year we were going to learn about 4 different civilizations. Interestingly enough, the quadrant for Latin America happened to be Mexico, and it was a family from a very poor background, and they lived in a cabin with dirt floors. And the teacher would look at me and say, well, isn't that how you grew up? And no, that wasn't my reality. But this is what all of my peer group now understood, that this is where I came from. And so there is one truth, and when I tried to question it, I remember I came home crying because I kept telling my parents, they're telling all my friends that this is how I grew up in, and now they think that this, and it was really traumatizing. So there is a hold of, this is the truth, and I remember that the teacher's response was, well, I'm sorry, that's what's in the textbook, you know? And I know we've all got examples like that. Okay, curriculum must be created before it is put into action, so inevitably, by the time it's actually used, it's somewhat or terribly outdated. Now, the more radical changes that you want to do in an institutional system, the more difficult it is to put through, so by the time they're actually put through, the further out of date they are. And finally, it assumes it knows what it's training people for. And this is the key because of the speed that things are changing at these days. Okay? Our school systems are based on things from the past, and they have not been able to move fast enough to change in order to really be training our kids for what ultimately is an unknown future right now. And so it's basically rigid. Now, back to Marshall McLuhan. We shape our tools, and thereafter, our tools shape us. We create the light bulb, and the light bulb now allows us to work 24 hours a day. We create the internet, and the internet now means that I'm going to go to this spot geographically and not this spot geographically. We shape our tools, and our tools shape us. So now again, let's apply this to the school. What does school teach our kids?
That their parents don't know anything about taking care of them.
Beautiful point. Beautiful point. What she said was the school teaches the kids that their parents are basically not the authority.
On anything.
And not anything. And in fact, that goes to the story that I was just telling. My parents actually went to talk to the teacher, and her response was, well, it doesn't matter, that's what's in the textbook. Fortunately, I had more attachment to my parents, etc., but the truth is that that really could have, basically the message there was, well, the book knows better than you even though you came from there. Yeah. Anything else? What else does the school as a medium teach our kids?
You must conform.
You must conform, yeah?
I was going to touch on a point where when a child questions the text, like I remember questioning whether it was Thanksgiving or if Columbus discovered America, how do you discover something that there were already people there? The answer was the same. It's, we can't question the text. You know, that's maybe something, maybe you should just not ask that question. And again, when you tell a child not to ask a question, you're kind of taking that child down. So when they do get into the workforce, when they do have a question, it's not going to be answered. Because, you know, it's in the text. When I get to my job, it's in the handbook. I don't have to know that.
You're teaching the child not to ask questions,
yes,
which goes directly against what you were proposing in the talk that you put forth. That's brilliant, yeah.
I was just going to mention that, as we all know, we can question the text. But with the text, you know, the text, I think it's all emotional. It's very emotional based from everything that's going on. And the text doesn't explain, it explains, you read about it, and you create this emotional vision. So it's everything's all emotional, and that's how you start to relate with other people across the world, maybe, possibly.
Okay.
And for myself, I think, like, if you're going to question the text, then we're creating, is there a way to create education by creating groups or like the ruins of the world, let's just say, because everything's emotional, so everything's energy. So, you know, each one of these ruins of the world carries an abundance of energy.
we'll get to that. Yeah, that's a good point. We'll get to that.
I think that teaches kids that there is really one road to success, whether it be
Beautiful.
a certain goal or an A, or then in college, where it also divides kids between good and bad.
Right. These are the good students, these are the bad students, these are the ones that are going to be engineers, these are the ones that, well, carpentry's fun. Absolutely, yeah. Somebody was sharing earlier about their child being diagnosed with Asperger's and then later having that diagnosis taken away but being put in the different class. Yeah, absolutely.
Teaches them that their success is externally judged. They're not the judge of their own success, and they also cannot set their own goals.
Beautiful.
I was going to say that it teaches them that learning is something that's hard and not fun.
Yeah, it's hard work.
Originality or individuality is not encouraged.
No space for that. Yep.
Teaches them not to trust themselves.
Absolutely. What a big thought. You should not trust yourself, you need to trust the authorities. So I'm going to run through some of these. Experts know what is important and will be fine. And you'll be fine as long as you fulfill their expectations. The structures around me are secure and the path is clear. If I do well in school, then I'll be able to go on to a good college. And if I go on to a good college, then I'll be able to get a good job. And that will ride me out throughout my life. Does that apply anymore?
No.
Yet that's still what structurally we're teaching in school, implicitly through the medium. Intelligence is the ability to memorize and repeat what is right. Is this kind of intelligence going to be an appropriate fit for the upcoming economy?
No.
Absolutely not. Deviation or non-compliance is complicated in the best of worlds and will be punished in the worst of worlds. So I think we talked about that already. I must fit myself unquestioningly to the structures that have been laid out before me. I must conform, intellectually and socially. And we're going to talk and touch upon the socially aspect a little bit more. And so basically, the values and goals, and I want to go a little bit into history, the values and goals of those who establish the medium permeate the structure of the final message. Now that's my very, very nerdy talk to take a little delve into history. And so what are these underlying values and goals that underpin the structure of education? Anybody know what the first model of public, compulsory, free education was? Prussia, yes. So one of the first states to create a free and compulsory education system was the Prussian system. Now, does anybody know under what circumstances the Prussian government decided this is where I want to invest my cash? War. In fact, yes, there was the perception within the Prussian state that the soldiers were being too prone to thinking for themselves instead of following orders, and that this was the reason why they were having problems in the Napoleonic Wars. And so what we needed was more compliance and more order following. And so all of this system was underpinned by the philosophies of one Johann Fichte. And here's a statement that he makes. These schools must fashion him, because back then it was all the him, we're talking about soldiers and boys, must fashion him in such a way that he simply cannot will other than what you wish him to will. Do you see the underpinning of that message that is implicit in the medium? Now, how is this exported to other countries? And I'm going to focus on the States and Canada just because this is what the brunt of the folks here are. Although there's actually, if you track this down, you can actually see this going into a lot of different states. And so in Canada, we have Adolphus Egerton Ryerson. Any of you Canadians, especially if you're from the East Coast, there's Ryerson University and Ryerson Streets, and so he's a big name. And for those of you from the States, we have Mr. Horace Mann. These two gentlemen both went over to Prussia. They educated themselves in this very effective way of educating the masses, and then brought them back to Canada and the States respectively. And again, sometimes quotes are revealing. So, education amongst the people is the best security for a good government and constitutional liberty. It yields a steady, unbending support for the former and effectually protects the latter. Mr. Horace Mann said it very succinctly, the state is the father of children. So these are the types of thoughts that basically underpin the institutional educational system that we all grew up with. Whether we were aware of that or not, whether teachers were aware of that or not, these are the underpinnings implicit in institutional education. Now, sometimes this is hard for us to see because everybody here was educated in this way, and sometimes going to the extreme makes it easier to see this. And for those that are from Canada, this will be familiar history, hopefully, at this point. For those of you who are not from Canada, this might be a bit of a shocker, because Canada we generally tend to see as a very, very kind culture and society. But one of Mr. Ryerson's doings, well, one of his actions was to create the residential school system. Who knows what the residential school system was? Okay, for those of you that don't know, there was a period in Canadian history where Indigenous children were taken often at gunpoint away from their families and put into institutional schools where priests and nuns at the time would take care of them. They were not allowed to speak their language. They were not allowed to practice their culture, both religious and social. They were actually separated into separate groups so that you wouldn't be with all of the folks from your own village. Rather, they would be split off so that they wouldn't be able to speak to each other. Corporal punishment was standard, and unfortunately, as has happened with a lot of schools that were run by priests and nuns, there was a lot of sexual abuse, which isn't part of the institutional understanding of things. It just happened to go with the rest of the basket. Now, again, this is extreme, but it often makes it so that we can see more clearly the basis for how the entire system was made. Now, the basic difference between this type of school and the schools that we all went to as a system is that these parents didn't send their children willingly, and so it makes it more forceful. However, the true underpinnings structurally are very similar.
Actually, you look at the history in the U.S., it's the same. And actually, in public schools, the parents didn't willingly send their children, even white people. They rioted in the streets. Parents went to prison. So it was extreme until people were broken.
Right.
So it looks extreme there, only because the other people were already broken.
Right.
Into the system.
Right. Very, very interesting thought. Thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, in Mexico also, right now you do see, and I got to work in Oaxaca with Indigenous communities, and one of the ways to start the acculturation process is to bring in school. And it's still the case in communities today. So this is still happening. It just, the history here was very extreme, and so it just makes it easier to see. Somebody else had a hand up?
I was just going to say, we have friends in Georgia, the United States, when they started homeschooling 40 years ago, were threatened.
Sure.
Prison and, lawsuits and all that.
Sure. And in fact,
it's not that ancient history.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, here within our group here in Mexico, we had a family from, where were they from? Alemania? They were from Germany.
Yeah.
They literally, in Germany, it's still illegal to homeschool your children. Again, Russian state, they have a lot of clarity into why they have their educational system. To date, it's still illegal. So this family actually came to homeschool in Mexico because it was illegal. They couldn't even tell their family. And that's this day and age right now, as we speak. So this is still going on. Anyways, so now what we do is we take that early institutional educational model, and then the Industrial Revolution happens. And so the Industrial Revolution says, yay, this is perfect. We can grab folks, and now instead of turning them into malleable citizens, we turn them into appropriate workers. And so when you're setting somebody up to be a factory worker, which is what basically industrial education was created for, or bent that way, you don't necessarily want them to be very creative. Okay, if you're making blue widgets, you don't want somebody along the assembly line thinking pink is nice. So you want them to do what they need to do. Here it's interesting because this actually says discipline. Now I would switch that a little bit because I think you want them to be disciplined in what somebody else is telling. So you actually are looking for a certain kind of discipline, and of course intelligence, you just want them to be intelligent enough for the position that you want them to fulfill. Not too much, then you start questioning everything and things just get messy, right? So as we talked about earlier. And for those of you who have not seen Ken Robinson's work on the internet, it's a must for all homeschoolers. His stuff is brilliant, but he actually goes through and he explains the factory model of education very clearly. This is one of the drawings he uses, so you've got separation of subjects, you've got bells ringing, you've got everything set up so that when they translate from the school to the factory situation. It's a very smooth transition. You've never changed.
And actually, in the United States in the early 1900s, Henry Ford funded this movement.
Correct, correct. And interestingly enough, we often look to Waldorf education as a real alternative, and Waldorf actually was created for the kids of the factory workers.
Right.
So when you start looking underneath, there's things to be questioned there as well, because it was an education for the children of the factory workers. So anyway, that's another topic.
Yeah, that's a huge
topic. Anyway, let's go back to Marshall. So, our age of anxiety, and this is very interesting, our age of anxiety is in great part the result of trying to do today's job with yesterday's tools and yesterday's concepts. Now, I want us to keep this quote in mind for when we round out all of our different thoughts and we pin them all together. Okay, any questions about that? Very easy, very clear, right? Nice and easy to see. Now I want to go to our next point. And with this, I want to introduce another couple of Canadians. This is Gabor Mate and Gordon Neufeld. Gabor Mate is a physician who specializes in the downtown Vancouver East Side. If you don't know about it, it's an area of Vancouver where you've got some severely addicted folks. It's a rough part of town. And he works with some of the most marginalized population in Canada. And Gordon Neufeld, who is a developmental psychologist. Now, they got together and they created a book called Hold On To Your Kids. Has anybody read this book? Okay, if you have not read this book, for me, this was the I cannot turn back. Okay, we were already on the homeschooling track and felt pretty confident about it, but when I read this book, it's one of those things where once you've got the knowledge, you just can't turn back. This is very interesting because what they talk about is attachment as a biological evolutionary imperative. And so basically, I want us to analyze this, and this goes back to the parts of my degree that are in the anthropology world, so this will be reflected here. Now, if you're in a nomadic situation, again, going to the extremes so we can see things more clearly, attachment to your clan is not just a matter of emotional stability, it's a matter of survival. If the storm is coming, I need some folks to be putting the cattle away while I set the TV up real quick so that we can all hide, and you cannot do that on your own. Being ostracized from your clan means death. And emotionally, evolutionarily, we are hardwired to attach to our clan in order to survive. We are pack animals. And there's a part of us that's wired in order to have the pack be the most important aspect of our survival. Now, as Lainey was pointing out, I worked a couple of years in Papua New Guinea, and so I'm going to pull on some examples from there. Here you have some Papua New Guineans, although that looks ancient, that's today. We attach to those with whom we spend the most time. And this is very interesting because this has changed radically since school was made institutionalized. And so whether they're what we call traditional society or whether we choose to see these Papua New Guineans as contemporary, you can see that they attach to whom they spend the most time with. Biologically, evolutionarily, we are hardwired to have our survival based on being attached and accepted by those with whom we spend the most time. Now, we choose to be like those with whom we spend the most time. And this is very interesting, and this is where this becomes so very interesting to what we do with education and school. So evolutionarily speaking, whether we, again, look at this as a traditional situation or as a contemporary situation, we look to be like those with whom we spend more time. So what does Gabor Mate and Gordon Neufeld tell us about that as far as school is concerned? Well, before school, who did we spend most time with? Mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, extended family, cousins, aunts and uncles. And so what we had was a vertical attachment structure, where the people who were going to be our survival mechanism were our family. Now what we've done as school, especially now that school has become something that started at 13, moved down to 7, 5, and now basically moms often, because of work, have to put their kids entirely into daycare the moment that they get out of maternity leave, which in many countries doesn't even exist. And so we're looking maybe at a month after birth, they're already in an institutional setting. So now, who do our kids spend the most time with? Their peers. And so now what we have is that we've gone from a vertical attachment structure to a horizontal attachment structure. Now this is very interesting because they put us in a very different survival situation. Now, okay, when you have vertical attachment, basically you're going to be following those of greater knowledge and greater emotional development than yourself. Now somebody touched on this in one of the talks yesterday, and so Coralie did, yes. And so basically when you attach vertically, when you have an issue, you're going to refer to somebody who actually knows a little more than you. And not because they're brilliant, just because they've been around on the planet for a wee bit longer than yourself. And so when you're having a situation, perhaps with your peers, perhaps in school or wherever, and you're vertically attached, you go to somebody who knows a little more than you. Whereas with horizontal attachment, if your clan is the rest of the 4-year-olds, and you're having a situation, who's seen a group of 3-year-olds hanging out together with no adult supervision where you're just watching from afar? And somebody hits somebody else. How do we solve this?
Hit again.
With the mechanisms that we have at 3 years old. Now if you're 12 and you're having an angst situation and you're vertically attached, you're going to solve this very differently than if you're horizontally attached and you're asking another 12-year-old for advice on what to do. Here's your next idea. When you're attached vertically, those with whom you're attached have a long-term vested interest in your development. Whereas when you're attached horizontally, really there is no long-term vested interest. Your peer group, we're good today, we're not good tomorrow, really it's not a big deal, I don't really care about you in the long term. Whereas mom and dad, they have a survival long-term vested interest in that child and their development. So what you have basically is a very emotionally secure situation and a very emotionally insecure situation. Now, I want you guys to look at this picture. Now I want you to interpret this picture, and let's call him Johnny, and I want you to interpret this picture if Johnny is vertically attached. What happens in this picture if Johnny is vertically attached?
Does he go to a parent or to somebody else?
Goes to parents. So he's going to get some advice from parents. What else?
Might not be as connected to feeling a need to be with the group.
He might not be as connected with needing a feeling of being with the group. This is huge because remember, this is literally our emotional underpinning. This is our survival, okay? So his fight or flight mechanism is going to kick in differently if he's vertically attached and, well, you know what, this sucks. They ostracized me from the group, it's not fun. But my emotional underpinnings aren't seated here. Any other thoughts on this? Okay, now I want you to reinterpret this picture as if Johnny is horizontally attached. Now what just happened? He's alone. He's alone. And as nomads, that means that nobody's putting up my teepee while I'm putting away the animals, and this is my survival. And so endocrinologically, physiologically, as part of our survival mechanism, this puts us in a huge, huge level of stress. When you screw up and you're vertically attached, your parents will give you guidance. They'll maybe tell you, yeah, you screwed up, but you're not going to be kicked out of the clan for a basic screw up. If Mary Jane doesn't like the way you wore your socks, and Mary Jane decides that it's not in her convenience for you being part of the clan, and Mary Jane happens to be the leader of the group, and you're horizontally attached, you've just been kicked out of the order of the village. And now you are on your own in the wilderness. And so endocrinologically, emotionally, we've seeded our security in completely unstable ground because Mary Jane and her friends don't really care what happens to us long term. And it's interesting from the perspective of homeschool because what's one of the first things that people question about when you make the decision to homeschool?
Socialization.
Socialization. Well, next time that somebody tells you, oh, but what about socialization? You say, yeah, they gotta hang out with kids, but you know, maybe we have to question socialization, and maybe we have the whole thing upside down. Gabo Mate works with the most marginalized of populations, and so again, he's seeing the extreme of what happens when we're horizontally attached. And this is where he comes up with these ideas together with Gordon Newfeld.
Miranda, can I just ask you a question about that? Can a child be both?
Can a child be both? Well, one of the things that he talks about in this book is that you cannot have two primary attachments. Yes, you can have a peer group that's important to you, but your roots are going to be seated here, or they're going to be seated here.
Why is it then that the child invariably grow up with a family? So, what is it about the attachment? Are they not attached to the family in the beginning, and then they become attached to their peers through their schooling experience? I can't quite understand how.
Basically, the idea is this. I mean, your clan is your clan is your clan, and biologically, we're hardwired for our clan to be our family structure, basically. And in traditional communities, that's the way it's always been. And evolutionary, that's the way we've been set up. It still applies today because we don't change biologically, evolutionarily fast enough to catch up with education and school and this and that. We're experiencing a situation now where we've normalized horizontal attachment. We think that that's the norm because that's what we've grown up with and that's what we've experienced. But we're also having a situation where there's a lot more stress, a lot more angst. And I'm not saying this is the only reason, but again, and we find it here. People often ask me, well, why did you decide to go back to Mexico? Really? With your kids? Don't you think you should go to Canada? And you know what? I appreciate in Mexico that the family's still alive, that grandma and grandpa are still around, and that we can people need socialization, the kids need clan, yes. Where do you find your clan? That's the question, and it goes back to what we were discussing yesterday as well, and creating clan structures for our nomads. But the reason that we're all seeking clan is because this is so deeply hardwired in us. Otherwise, we wouldn't care about going to a new country and finding clan, and this wouldn't be an issue. So yes, as homeschoolers, we seek out other homeschoolers so that our kids have clan. But the point that I want to make for homeschooling based on this book is that the first and most important clan is the vertical clan. And the kids need to know that no matter what, mom and dad are there behind them. And that this is where their rootings are. Now once you're rooted, and once you're solid, now you can expand horizontally. But you know that if something happens to you, clan is there, and you're solidly rooted in the ground.
I just want to mirror back something that you just said. You said that, well, how is it that children grow up in a family and then they seek this horizontal attachment? Just because a child's in a family does not mean they're attached to their family. So, yeah, that's huge.
Is that then suggesting that those children that do not feel attached, that do not have a sense of clan from their family, will invariably, I'm just...
Not invariably. Okay, again, I think I got your question. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to function at all. It just makes your functioning more cumbersome.
And it can be healed.
And it can be healed.
Yeah, because I wasn't attached vertically, and I had to do a lot of work.
I was going to suggest maybe this analogy where instead of being rooted in one like the other, your roots are always going to be your family, and in order to break from the vertical root system, there would be more of a break, so that branch, that family branch would break off, where it would be a member of a child. And then maybe not be rooted in a horizontal area, because again, it doesn't seem like there's any roots there. It just seems like a single plane, kind of like a pile of branches. And at any time, one of those branches will be thrown out. So as a branch, you know, that DNA is still your family, but I don't think there's any real roots in a horizontal.
In a horizontal. Well, no, there is no roots. That's the point. These kids are doing this, and they're basically one is rooting your emotional security on solid rock, and the other one is in quicksand. And so what happens is that very easily you can be destabilized emotionally, whereas if you're vertically attached, you're rooted more solidly. Now, there's a lot of us here in which we're not adequately vertically attached. We're managing to sail through our lives. Folks who are vertically attached are just more solid. And it's interesting, I have to say that one of the things that, for my husband, kind of turned okay, do we homeschool or do we not homeschool? Here's my wife with all these crazy ideas. One of the things that rooted or solidified things for him was when we started meeting adult children that were homeschooled. And one of the things that came out is that they just were at peace. They were grounded. I mean, we had a place here where we would bring, we had it as a rental home, and so we'd have lots of families coming in because it was a family space. And so we'd have lots of kids coming in from the States, from Canada, from England. There was a whole bunch of kids like, you know, with this kind of, I'm here with my parents, you know. And then we had this homeschool family, and the kids were engaged, and they would talk to adults, and they had interesting conversation, and they didn't have this, I'm here with mom and dad face. And to him, that was like, you know what, sometimes you have to see the result. And that's not to say all homeschool kids are perfect, but we've just noticed that there does tend to be a pattern, and that homeschool kids with this vertical attachment somehow are more at peace with themselves and what they're doing in their lives.
I just want to point out that something to also keep in mind is that the value of the vertical roots, I think, a lot to do with the health of family. And in large populations, both America and Canada, very dysfunctional family and vertical relations. And the homeschooling idea, I really think there's a class issue that comes along with that. I just have to always keep throwing that out there. That there are a lot of people whose kids need that public support. And I think the way the schools do it is not right, it's not best. But just separating, just putting it all on the family is just not doable for a large portion of the population.
Couldn't agree with you more. Now, the issue, again, going back to the roots, is why are so many families so screwed up? And my feeling on that is because we've broken that vertical attachment in the past. And so it's not that the vertical attachment versus the horizontal attachment is the issue, is that that vertical attachment has been broken back so far back. And so yes, you have dysfunctional families because everybody's grown up horizontally attached.
No, it's because that's the whole thing about modern society. It forces people, everybody, you know, the mom and the dad to go to work, and it's all about buying stuff, a bigger house, a bigger car.
Right.
And even with school, they have the after schools, everybody needs to do the sports, and so it's all about getting everybody to be busy,
That's right.
working to get stuff so you can consume more, and then ends up with, you know, the family is broken, and then it just goes on and on.
Somebody yesterday said the true luxury in today and into the future isn't having surplus capital, it's having surplus time. And who do you apply your surplus time to? Your vertical attachment group. So yeah, some thoughts that are coming in from the other presentations.
Just to sort of touch on that, the lineage, it's a class issue, but it started a long time ago. Me, as a black person in America, my family was broken, you know, a few hundred years ago. So it's a class issue that started intentionally so long ago. Now it seems a little more obvious because it's trickled down into other ethnic groups. Now it's just so out of control that everyone from all classes and races can see it.
Right.
But there have been, you know, obviously going into indigenous cultures and seeing the difference, the separation that happens. And it's deliberate. It takes 100, 200, 300 years for other classes or races to see it when it hits their doorstep. But for, say, my family, it was broken before my mother was born.
Right.
That's the thing, you lose the sense of community. Yeah? So that's a thing where, you know, not everybody needs a snowblower or a car. You can share it with people on your street. Yeah? So it's so you can spend less money if people share more and have
Absolutely. So yes, obviously homeschooling, and I think that we touched upon this in one of the previous presentations as well, one of the prohibiting factors for a lot of folks is the economic reality, and that is a structural class situation, absolutely. Now, we can't fix what happened, we can understand it, and we can build from where we are today with this understanding. And so next time that somebody says, oh yeah, but the socialization, this gives you a very solid footing to say, yeah, socialization is important, but socialization with whom and with whom primarily. And again, it's not to say that horizontal socialization isn't important, it just cannot be the primary attachment location. And if you actually take the book up, and I really can't recommend it enough, he actually goes through and details all of the stuff that you guys are asking about.
I think just vertical attachment is very apparent if you just actually think about it as adults, in our age group. Children and our older people
Are also seen as
Yeah.
so this is, in this age bracket, but if you're older, you're burden on our society. If you're younger, you're
Right.
innocent.
And this is actually, and thank you for that, this is actually a reflection of the fact that we were brought up in same age groups. And so we didn't have a situation where we were always living with younger kids and know how to deal with them, and older generations and knowing how to deal with them. So yeah, the fact that we're having that situation reflects upon how we were raised, because we're part of this history. So we're understanding how we're embedded in this history. And so basically the idea is that evolutionarily, vertical attachment is of critical importance to our emotional security. Now, if you're not emotionally secure, everything else is just harder. Some of us might deal with it better, and some of us might have a sunnier face than others, and that's going to be a whole lot of different factors who does better with it or not. But if you can, with this knowledge, understand that vertical attachment is crucial to your kids being able to go out in the world and do what they feel they need to do, then this radically changes the way we think of a lot of things in our society. So to recap, and I want to put these thoughts together now, and hopefully I've done a good job of this. So we have a future where job insecurity is the norm, where hopping from job to job and career to career is what everybody's going to expect. We have the absolute uncertainty of, well, how bad is it going to be? How high is the water going to go? Are we going to be able to keep on living here, or are we all going to be nomads? Okay, how is this going to affect the future? Maybe new jobs will open up, but who's going to be able to take those jobs? And we'll talk about that in a second. So we've got the situation of institutionalized education that our kids are living in, where they are being set up for a type of job situation which really no longer exists. So it's out of date. And then you've got this situation of horizontal attachment and emotional insecurity throughout our society. And so, now I want to look at our alternative. Well, any questions about this scenario? Okay, so to recap, that's the recap, and then, so now let's look at education outside of the pre-established institutional structures. And again, this is my catch-all for homeschooling, world schooling, unschooling, name it as we will. And you guys all know about this, so there's different scenarios. You can do it at home, you can do it in the world, you can do it with, you can make the lab, you can do it around the world, as a lot of you guys are doing right now. And I want to take a little detour into lateral and divergent thinking. I'm being flagged on time, so I'm just going to do one of these. Okay, what is lateral or divergent thinking? This is real important, because lateral and divergent thinking, actually, let me do this a different way then. Here's lateral or divergent thinking. So lateral and divergent thinking is when we have the opportunity of thinking in things in different ways. Now, there's a book called Breaking Point and Beyond, and basically one of the problems, and you might have heard this earlier, is how many things can you do with a paperclip? Okay, now, when they did a study, they found that most people have 10 to 15 things that they could not come up with, and a genius can come up with about 200 things. Now, they did a study of 15,000 people. Okay, now these people, interestingly enough, started at kindergarten, and what they found is that at kindergarten, 98% of kindergarten students came out at genius level. So they could make the paperclip into a paper airplane, they could make the paperclip into something that you stick up your nose, they could make it into an earring, they could make it a rocket ship that would divergent thought. You can do whatever. And how do you do that? Is the paperclip a 20-foot rubber paperclip, or is it this kind of paperclip? So I can go anywhere with my thinking. Yeah? Now interestingly, when they did the study over time, they found that as they grew, divergent thinking took a dive. Go back to the school as a medium. Okay, so I'm not going to go into that, you guys all got it. So one possible explanation, since it seems that innately we're almost all blessed with divergent thinking, what could make this skill deteriorate? Well, yours are being told what to do, what is right, what is wrong, and you really should stick to the program, and the answer is, yeah, kids in Mexico live in dirt houses, and that's it. And so possibly we've given maybe two answers to any given problem if divergent thinking is really thought about. And this goes back to our idea of the medium as the message. And so we've basically educated kids out of divergent thought. Now, the medium is the message applied to uninstitutional school. Homeschooling, unschooling, world schooling. First thing that we're teaching our kids, by the very fact of taking outside of these institutional structures, is that you can build your own reality. You don't like what's there? Create it, build it. And the biggest thing that we're giving our kids is the fact that they've lived the experience of, yeah, I can do my own thing. And you know what? I came out all right. And I survived, and here I am, and my family's thriving together. And so they've lived it. It's not a theory. You can focus on what you excel at or are interested in. That's legitimate. Okay, so we are allowing ourselves and our children to actually decide what's their values, not what somebody else told them is important and what they need to work for, but rather what they feel is important to them. You're ultimately responsible for the path your life takes. There's a myth in institutional education that somebody else is going to set you on that right path. Remember, I get good grades, I go to college, I find a job. That today is clearly a myth. Our kids aren't built and structured that way because they're not in these institutions. You get to set your own goals, and it's up to you to find a way to fulfill them. This is huge. So our children are lateral thinking by design because of the medium is the message of unschooling. Life is not divided into discrete individual disciplines and areas of knowledge. This is very interesting because a lot of the forward-thinking, progressive things that are going on in this world are not in economics, in anthropology, in developmental psychology. They're in those middle grounds. They're in those gray areas between fields. So Gordon Neufeld gets together with Gabor Mate and they come up with a different structure of thought that neither of them could come up with on their own. So having this situation where our kids are used to blending areas of knowledge actually makes them on the cutting edge of forethought. Growth and learning are everywhere and they can be an end in themselves. This is another interesting thought because again, where are new discoveries being made? In these fields, in these areas, where we're just, for the love of learning, learning because we love it. Einstein didn't come up with E equals mc squared because he was trying to get an A on an exam. He did it because he was hanging out and he was just enjoying the thought process. And this is where a lot of discoveries are made. Time is flexible, and you can choose to work and play at your natural rhythm. Now, this is both day and night. Some kids are late in the morning, that's when they start functioning properly, and some of us are early morning people. Some kids start reading at 8. I know that in the unschooling world, sometimes that's 13. Others start at 3 and they're very interested. When we give our kids that opportunity, they develop very differently than when they're told at 5 that, damn, you should be reading, and you're slow now, and now you're on that bottom end. My husband is a night owl, I'm an early riser. There's a lot of, he's pointed out to me many times, that there's a lot of very, very creative people that never saw the daylight in all their lives. And if you're a student of a standardized educational system, you have to be there in the morning. Why? Because mom and dad need to go to work. So the babysitting service and how our kids' education is structured around mom and dad's labor. Life is fluid, structures are fluid, change is constant and can be a positive source of opportunity. This is huge because of what's coming down the pipeline. And so our kids were born and raised in this idea. This is not a shock for them. Learning outside of institutional structures is practice for real life. Now I want to leave you with this image. This is my image of the happy homeschooler. And so I have her surfing on an economic reality that is shifting. Okay, you're on the ocean, it's going in one direction, it's going in the other direction, and here you have the security of riding on vertical attachment. So yeah, I can surf because I know I'm on my board and I'm stable and my knees are bent. I still remember my basketball coach, bend your knees, you always got to be ready. If your knees are bent, it doesn't matter what's going on underneath, you're able to ride it. And if you're riding on a very solid board, hey, that wave is cool, bring it on. Whereas if you're not, that's damn scary what's coming up behind you. You're hardwired for change. This has been their life experience throughout. And this goes back to that shifting economy. Their life has always been around, well, you know, what's working now? What's not working now? Let's shift it. How many of you guys have bought curriculums, used it for a little bit, and then discarded them because it wasn't the right fit? And nobody thinks that that's weird in our situation, whereas in school, you better fit to the curriculum, right? So our kids are used to this stuff. You got to see if it fits or not, and then you move accordingly. Brought up seeing that their parents are recreating reality. This is huge. None of us have this privilege. And I honestly don't think that we know just how huge this is going to be until we see our kids as adults going under their way, whatever that may be. Happy and content in this self-determined world. How many people are unhappy in their job? This is the job that they were told they had to do, right? These are the goals that were set for me by mom and dad, and so now I get up in the morning and I go to work, but this isn't where my heart is. Our kids, well, they're going to be creative and motivated from the heart. Homeschool gives, by its very nature, the medium is the message, the ability to confidently and joyfully serve the coming